Hello everyone and welcome back to Age of Nagash, which is a channel dedicated to Age of Sigmar. And in this video, I'm not going to lie to you, I'm pretty excited because we are going to look at the Orruk Warclans again. And in this video, it's going to be why play Bonesplitters, which is something I am quite interested to talk about. Obviously, we recently talked about the Ironjawz, didn't we? And it's going to be similar in this video as well, going over their why play, because Orruk Warclans, as I mentioned in the Ironjawz video, is a little bit of a funny one. Orruk Warclans is not an allegiance, but within that book, you have 3 allegiances. So it's really quite important that I dive down into doing a why play for the Bonesplitters quite soon, because as I've moved on to the sub-allegiances now for all the other armies, I want to make sure that all the main allegiances are covered as a priority. So Bonesplitters are one of them. And as such, when I go and review them in this video, it's going to be maybe a bit longer compared to some of the other, as I look at now, sub-allegiance why plays. But that is because I'll be going over the battle traits for the army. I'll also be going over the artifacts, command traits, the sub-allegiances, the spells, and the battalions as well. Not the units. This isn't a full, really in-depth army video, but we're going to talk about the army as kind of a whole. Of course, as normal, I'll go over the lore as well and the strengths and weaknesses of the army. And the point of this video, in case you haven't seen a why play before on my channel, is essentially giving you the information that maybe you need to decide if this is an army that you should play and it's an army you're excited to play, or maybe you should play another army. Alternatively, if you've already got these models and I don't know, they've been sitting on a lost project desk or something a long while ago and you want a reason to start building and painting them, hopefully by the end of this video I'll be able to give you enough motivation to do it. But we will be honest here, we will point out their weaknesses. I will say that this is an army I don't personally play, so what I'll be doing here is giving you from my thoughts and from what my experiences are of Age of Sigmar, giving you my opinion on the Bonesplitters themselves. So if you have anyone out there who's watching this who actually plays the Orruk Warclans Bonesplitters, and there's anything I've said in this video that you agree with or disagree with, or anything you think that you could add, please let us know in the comments down below. It'd just be great to hear that, and we're all here to learn at the end of the day. So with that aside, the only thing I just want to mention before we get started is my patrons, as they do such a fantastic job and they keep the channel going, so they have to have a shout out. So that's going to be my Morgasts, which are Sandback, Johnathan H, Filq and Bleed Red, my Vampires, which is Mir, Martin S, Rouse321 and David A, and my Necromancers, which is Jacq.l, RadiationRiley, AW77, Dice Sagas, WolfNick, Michal W, Quad, Cranky Wombat and Chris C. Every single one of you guys, keep the channel going. I really cannot say thank you enough and how much I appreciate that. If you would like to become a patron to keep the channel going, you'll find a link to it at the top of the description down below. And if you can't do that, that's absolutely fine. But if you do enjoy the video at any moment, make sure you smash that like button and that subscribe button if you haven't already. And make sure you hit that bell notification if you haven't, because they're all free to do so and it's a great way to support the channel. But with all that aside, let us actually get on to the Bonesplitters. And the first thing we'll be talking about is their lore. Now this isn't a dedicated lore video to the Bonesplitters, but we'll just talk about them as a summary. So the Bonesplitters are, of course, if you know Warhammer Fantasy, they are like the savage orcs you had there that have been made into their own army, really. So they are, unlike the Ironjawz we've recently covered, the Bonesplitters, instead of wearing, thick armor and just, going in there a bit like tanks, on the other hand, they are more of a horde faction. And they actually forsake their armour and their sanity at that point. They're all pretty crazy and mad. And they fight in a much more savage way. Which I know you may be thinking, oh, surely Ironjawz fight in a savage way. No, these guys fight even more savagely, if you can believe that. They cover themselves in war paint as well. Not for fashion reasons or anything like that, or trying to get big on TikTok. But instead they cover themselves in that war paint because they believe it protects them. And the way of how the Orruk philosophy works and sort of how chaos works in Age of Sigmar is because enough of them believe it protects them, it actually does. So what you see in game is they have like an after save, and which we'll get to later, but it works in really quite nice. The interesting thing also about the Bonesplitters is how are Savage Orcs about? Are they just born savage? Are they just like, grew up in savage clans and all that sort of thing? Is that just that society? It's actually a little bit more different to that, because the interesting thing is that they may have just been normal orcs, or they may have been Ironjawz, but at some point a very unfortunate accident has been bestowed upon them. They could have been running after their next meal and they've tripped and they've banged their head, They could be sitting next to a tree and a very large coconut or something like that bangs their head. Or they could have been in a scrap and they end up getting their head banged, or fall off, I don't know, a mountain, get their head banged. You can kind of see the theme here. At some point, their head has been banged, and then that tends to make them go a little bit savage and a little bit, not mad, but maybe their connection to reality of the mortal realms, as whatever that means, becomes a bit more distant. And that is when they become much more savage. And that is only going to be if they wake up from this traumatic event, because some of them, after getting hit a bit too hard on the head, don't actually wake up. But if they do, they actually have had a vision, one of those sort of, a very deep dream, a epiphany, if you will. And that is actually giving them a vision. Or they've heard voices as well that have told them to go into the wilds, to forsake their Ironjawz war clan or wherever Orruk clan they came from, and actually go into the wilds, like I say, and find other like-minded Orruks that have had similar accidents, which then they form or join an existing clan, which is quite interesting, right? Because it's one of those funny things where this guy has had a knock on the head or whatever, he's just had some sort of traumatic event that has made him gone mad. But the nice thing is, he's not alone, and there are other Orruks in the same situation, and they all hold hands and join together, and then these are what are known as the Bonesplitters. And the reason why they're given that name is because they go around in a big wah, and apologies for if I pronounced that wrong, I don't care at this point, and they actually go around hunting monsters and the many beasts of the mortal realms, and then splitting their bones open, as they believe the energy of Gorkamorka is trapped within them. So that is how they see Gorkamorka when we talk about the Ironjawz, like in the other video, and how they go on these big wars as part of Gorkamorka's will. And the interesting thing is, although they believe in different things than the Bonesplitters, they sort of help each other out, because when the Bonesplitters release this energy that's cracked open from these bones that they smash open, obviously the Bonesplitters, that power that comes out obviously fuels and empowers the Bonesplitters, but it also can pass on to a huge distance to then fuel on the Ironjawz as well, and that's something that we often see when we talk about the Big War, but that's for a different video. So then that is going to be enough for the lore in this video, as we have an understanding of who the Bonesplitters actually are in Age of Sigmar. And the other thing now to talk about is going to be their strengths and weaknesses. So firstly, we're going to talk about strengths off the table, as that's always an important thing you have to think about if we're looking to start an army. It's not all about how they actually play on the table. You've also got to think about, I'm actually going to have to build and paint a lot of these guys. Am I going to get bored halfway through and then give up on this project and it's all been a waste of money? Because even if you resell them, you'll get less than how much you paid for. So it's always important to talk about it. So as a strength, firstly, what I want to talk about is, again, this is similar to when I talked about the Ironjawz as well with Alex, is they're just so fun to paint. Because you've got, obviously, in the Bonesplitters compared to the Ironjawz, you have, obviously, the same green flesh, or however you want to paint it. You can do them albino, whatever, but as you have a lot of flesh, basically, to paint, a lot of skin, it means you can go really crazy and really bright with your colours, and even more so with the Bonesplitters, because they've got that sort of like crazy savage feel to them. So you can do, obviously, if I just go take the example of the bright green skin, I know you can do olive skin as well, but me personally prefer the really bright skin, as I think for, especially in the green, it really stands out on the table. And so you've got that, and then you've got so many different tribal tattoos and stuff you can do on them, and you can really go as mad as with the war paint as you like. And unlike when I talked about doing that for Ironjawz, it's like you can give them war paint and stuff. They've got a lot of armor on, so there's only a few places you can do it. You can obviously do it on the armor, that looks cool, but you've got a few places to do it on the skin, and it's just like a cool thematic thing you can do to your Ironjawz. It doesn't really make a difference to them, like, in the lore or anything, going outside, red does this and blue does that and everything else from like 40k. It doesn't make too much of a difference. But when you look at the Bonesplitters, it makes a huge difference, because, right, when you use like the war paint rule, which, like I said, when we get to the rules later, we'll have a look at, it's not just like, I think a war paint on. Oh yeah, I couldn't be bothered to paint the war paint. No, paint it. Show what that rule is actually like on the table and how the models look. Obviously, you don't have to. But if you're like, oh, I'm a bit unsure about how to paint them, how to do the tattoos, it sounds like very finicky and, it has to be very fine. No, it doesn't. Just do like lines in them or something. You'll just do circles, or circles not the easiest thing, but you can do like jagged lines and something. It doesn't have to be neat. for things like freehand, especially when it comes to tattoos and stuff, what you can do, if it doesn't have to be incredibly fine, is I tend to just do like a point system. So basically you do the dots of an outline of a shape you like, and then you just connect the dots and colour in the colour of the tattoo you would like. It's as simple as that. And I actually did that for my Ironjawz when I did like flames on their armour, or like just spikes on their armour coloured in, I think it was my colour. So I did like yellow armour and then red tattoos, which I found really enjoyable. Also, like when I fought against BoneSplitters a while ago, the chap I was fighting against, fantastic person and player, and what he had was loads of the Boar Boys, and to separate the units, the Boars Mohicans were just different colours. So I think there was, or off the top of my head, I think there was like purple, orange and light blue, something like that, but it just seemed really weird, but it just works so well in the army. And then the models riding the Boars had the corresponding tattoos on their skin, as in their colours, as the Mohicans that the Boars had. So it just felt really fun, and it just tied it all really nicely. Like being, it all ties in well in the madness of itself, which I thought was really quite fun. So yeah, I think for painting side, it's good. What I will say though is, unlike the Ironjawz, there's actually going to be quite a few models to paint. And not like hordes upon hordes upon hordes of Skaven or something like that, or loads of grots on the Gloomspite Gits, as a better example probably. It's going to be different because you have a sort of like mid-range amount of models, more than Ironjawz, but not a mass horde. So you have like a nice mid-range. What I will say though, with these models, they don't look really, really, really old and dated, as some models out there, but they don't look as new and as shiny as like the Ironjawz ones, as in terms of like the brutes, the gore grunters, the mega bosses, everything that came out new when they were released as a faction within Age of Sigmar a few years back. The Bonesplitters don't look as brand new and shiny, which is a shame, and some of their poses, in my honest opinion, feel a little bit too similar, a little bit like the Alden Star Jumps or something. That's my opinion, but I think when you see the models actually in person, they look better. When they're in better, paint schemes and everything, it really does add to it. And obviously you can do conversions and stuff like that. But that's just how I think, and it's something I'm not going to avoid by saying that the models definitely look older than Ironjawz if you're considering doing either or. And similar to like the Ironjawz and some other armies, you don't have loads of choice of models or units in your army. That's just another thing you have to bear in mind, which isn't, like I said, unique to the Bonesplitters, but it's not like one of these armies like Stormcast Eternals, for example, that has an absolute load of models. Also, like if you compared it to Gloomspite Gits, it doesn't have that many models. So the other thing to bear in mind with that, though, is that because you can play in obviously the big warg, you can use Ironjawz models as well. So it's not just this is the only way to run the army, and this is the only way you can have models in your army, right? And you can also ally with Gloomspite Gits as well. Bear in mind, I'm not too sure that's the best thing to do, but you can do it if you would really like some trolls or something to have more of a orcs and goblins sort of theme if you would like to. And then talking about the army on the table, so I'm going to get down to the specific rules and the allegiances and everything else like I mentioned for the army in a moment, and I'll put those pictures on the screen like I did for the Ironjawz one. But to talk about, just sort of a summarise, what are their sort of strengths and how do they win their games? Now, a lot of that really comes down to the amount of attacks these guys can do. Really can be huge, and you essentially go up to your opponent and go, right, roll this bucket, that's your save rolls, right? It's death by weight of dice, for example, rather than elite attacks like we saw for the Ironjawz. We saw the Ironjawz where there's quite a few, damage 2 attacks, so you can basically make anything in the army damage 2 in a certain way. With this, more like damage 1 all around, but there's just so many more loads of attacks you're chucking out instead. There's a lot of ways in this army, which we'll get to when we read the rules, to make you have exploding hits of 6s. So what do I mean by that? So that means when a unit rolls a 6 to hit, that 6 turns into 2 wound rolls. And there's lots of ways to do it and to stack it. And then that's really how they add these amount of attacks up. So they've got that. They're also pretty fast and they have some movement shenanigans. Like, as just a flat out thing, most of the units get +2 to charge from the musician in a unit, which is good. They have ways to move before the game starts. They have spells that can basically, when I fought against them on some bloody pigs, managed to fly across the board, moving something like, I can't remember, I think it was something like 20 odd inches, and then they managed to charge me 12 inches, and they literally were flying pigs, right? So their movement can be quite good and can kind of surprise your opponent, shall we say, by, as an opponent who's fought against them, by how fast they can be. And then something that we couldn't not say is in their lore, when we talked about their greatest hunting down monsters, they are in the game, they have units specifically for practically just hunted down monsters as well. And they really do excel in the army. And what I really like is it just really transfer where the lore is to how they are on the table. Now, not every single model gets a bonus against a monster, but they kind of do in some ways, and some units, like I say, really capitalise on that aspect of their lore, and I think that's lovely, because if you didn't see that come over, it just would feel a bit sad, right? And I know not every enemy army runs monsters, some do more than others, you know, if you go against Sons of Behemoth, you know, happy days, but it's just a nice thematic thing, and most people, unless you're playing the top competitive list of how your army can play, and that dictates you don't take a monster. If you go to a tournament or just play most people at casual games, they tend to bring a monster. I always do, just because it's that nice centerpiece for the army and it just feels right. So you're always going to probably fight against one monster, which is useful. So with that, then going on to the sort of weaknesses of the army. So what are your weaknesses? Your saves in this army are pretty atrocious on your characteristics. You can buff that, but still you can't really make it amazing. So your saves are bad in this army. You know, they're naked practically. They've got some loincloth just for PC reasons. They don't have any actual armour unlike the Iron Jaws, and their war paint is good, but it's not amazing and it won't negate, you know, most of the damage that they take. So they've got that, and then they also have not great bravery in this army either. You're sort of looking at 5, bravery 6, that sort of thing, maybe 7 at most for some of your units, which is a problem you'll face for sure, and that is why this army tends to use Inspiring Presence a lot, just to make sure that they don't take such a big hit, because like I said, their saves aren't very good, and then suffer hugely to Battle Shock. So that is why Inspiring Presence can be very useful in this army, as I also explained for Bonesplitterz, and can also be useful for the Iron Jaws as well, but more so in this army, I would say, compared to the Iron Jaws. And as I said, you have got ways to chuck out, you know, just bucket loads of attacks for your opponent to have to deal with, but there's not loads of rend in the Bonesplitterz. I know you can have big stabbers that can do a fair bit of rend and everything else, but there's not a huge amount of rend across the board in your army, like -2 at most. And then you also don't have a huge amount of mortal wound output. And I know there are ways for you to do mortal wounds in this army, but there's no huge reliable mortal wounding way that you can just do guaranteed every turn. Like, for example, if you use a Terrorgeist, which is an extreme example, I know, but the Terrorgeist, that is, if it's buffed, it's more than likely going to do at least 6 mortal wounds just out flat. Or you've got other armies that, you know, on 6s to hit will do mortal wounds. You don't have that here. It's all about the weight of dice. So if you're going against, again, another extreme example, but the Ishlan Guard from Deepkin, which at the moment they can have 2-up saves, they can sometimes have 3-up saves, but when they have the 2-up save, they can be rolled in 1 if they have that all-out defense on them. And if you just haven't got mortal wound output because those guys don't take rend, you just can't deal with it. And it's just going to be really big, tough and troublesome, but that's like one of the most competitive armies out there, so, you know, it's might be an unfair comparison, but I just thought I'd let you guys know what some other armies that can easily have a 3-up save rolled in 1s or something, some very elite Stormcast armies, and then other armies as well when buffed up. You know, if you look at, you could make Slaves of Darkness Chaos Warriors, 3-up save, re-rolling, so it can be troublesome, but sometimes they then have mortal wound saves. So, you know, it's all swings and roundabouts, but that's just something to point out that they don't have a huge amount of rend in this army, and they also don't have a huge amount of mortal wound output. So then the next thing I'm going to be talking about is actually going to be the Bonesplitterz Allegiance abilities. So these are the Bonesplitterz battle traits, and firstly it's going to be the Unstoppable Savagery. So what you can see from this point onwards when I'm talking about these rules, I would have actually taken a picture of these rules on my phone, and they can be on the video and displayed now that you guys will be able to see them, so you can read along if you'd like to, or you can just listen while I tell you them. And apologies if the, you know, I say the quality is a bit bad, as it is just taken on an iPhone. But with nonetheless, let us start with the Bonesplitterz Warclans. So if your army is a Bonesplitter army, you can give your army the Bonegrind keyword, the Dracfoot keyword, or the Icebone keyword. All Bonesplitter units in your army gain that keyword, and you can use the extra abilities listed for that Warclan. So this is something we often see when we talk about allegiance abilities for an army, so you can have sub-allegiances, right? Not all of them. I understand Nighthaunt, Gloomspite, and everyone else who doesn't have one. But here we have 3 to choose from, and we will get to that later. And it basically is just telling you how you use a sub-allegiance for an army and how it actually works. Okay, so going on to like the first proper one, it's going to be the Tireless Trackers. So after armies are set up, but before the first battle round begins, half the Bonesplitter units in a Bonesplitterz army, rounding up, can move up to 5 inches. If both players can move units before the first battle round begins, they must roll off, and the winner chooses who moves their units first. Okay, so this is something if you play against like that very popular Stormcast battalion at the moment from the Marathi book. It's also going to be from things like Untamed Beast, but I think a lot of the pre-game moves, to be honest with you, won't really clash too much with this as you don't move too far forward. Usually it's like up to D6 inches or 6 inches, or in this case 5 inches is mainly for, like I said, that Stormcast thing, and there may be another example out there where it can be useful against, just in case you need to do that roll-off. But most of the time your opponent won't have pre-game moves, so that means that your guys can freely just move the extra 5 inches, which BoneSplitters on the label for them on their war scrolls, they don't seem like the fastest army out there, and they're still not the fastest army, but you can see how you can start making them pretty damn fast. So, you've got that, and then going on to the one that I have already mentioned in its lore is going to be the War Paint. So, roll a dice each time you allocate a wound or mortal wound to a model with this battle trait. On a 6, that wound or mortal wound is negated. See, I really like that because unlike if I was to compare it to Legions of Nagash that has a similar ability, or a lot of the other death armies, or anything that allows you to ignore like a wound or more wound on a 6, basically an after damage save as I call it, they tend to always be wholly within 12 inches, so the Legions of Nagash one is just within 6 inches, but like Daughters of Cain, this one is just anywhere on the board, and when I mean wholly within, I mean of range of a hero or general it tends to be, or a buff piece or something, but this is just anywhere on the battlefield, which is very, very useful because you're going to be taking quite big model size units in this army. And when I say that, I don't mean blocks of 60 models and stuff, but because your models tend to be on like 32mm bases, it'll be quite hard for it all to be in range. So no, I like that, that's good. It's only a 6, right? Which means that statistically you look at it and it's a 6 with all damage is saved. Talking as a death player, does that often happen? Funny enough, for my rolls, I tend to roll really badly for my saves, but then I roll good for my death saves. So it kind of evens out. And at times it hasn't been useful enough, if I'm completely honest, but there has been times where it has saved a unit from dying, or a hero from dying, or something like that, and it's basically on that alone has made a huge impact in the game and could potentially be game-changing. Obviously, very far in between when those moments happen, but when they do, it's all worth it, right? And you feel great. So the next one is going to be a Monster Hunters. So if a friendly Bone Splitter unit is within 3 inches of an enemy monster when it is chosen to fight, before it piles in, you can pick one of the following abilities to apply to it until the end of that phase. So you've got Wild Abaddon. That unit can move an extra 3 inches when it piles in. And then you've got Stab, 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 which is add 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made by that unit that target a monster. And then you've got Berserk Strength, which is if the unmodified wound roll for an attack made by that unit that targets a monster is a 6, that attack inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target in addition to any normal damage. And you may be thinking like, wound roll of 6, I mean that's alright, but how many attacks are you making? I told you, you can end up chucking a bucket load of attacks at your opponent if you get all your buffs off and everything else, so it could be useful. Something to note here is it doesn't state you have to attack that monster. So if you don't want to attack the monster, for some reason you want to attack the other unit you're next to, you can still make that extra 3-inch pile-in. So that could still be good for your boars who are on, obviously bigger bases to make sure they get the pile-in, and still useful for things like just your Savage Orcs, because like I said, 32mm bases aren't the smallest, so it can be useful there. And then obviously if you're going against a monster, lovely stuff. So going on to the next one, which is Spirit of the Beast. So do not take Battleshock tests for a Bonesplitterz unit if any enemy monsters were slain by wounds inflicted by that unit in the same turn. So this feels a bit sad because at most your opponent will probably have 1, maybe 2 monsters at average. Obviously, like I say, if you go against Sons of Behemoth, there's a lot more monsters there. But on average, 1 to 2 monsters, and it's only that turn. I think that this should be for the rest of the battle. People may go, oh, that wouldn't work, so that'd be too powerful, but I doubt it would be, because only 1 unit that killed that monster would benefit from it. So that's okay, but you can't rely on it as being your, oh, I've got bad bravery, but I don't have to worry because I've got this ability. You can't rely on it, unfortunately. And then you've got your command ability, which is basically the same as the Ironjaw's, War ability, but this one's the Bonesplitterz War. It's the same rules and stuff pretty much, but just flip for Bonesplitterz. But I'll read it out anyway. So You can use this command ability once per battle at the start of the combat phase. If you have a Bonesplitterz army and your general is on the battlefield, if you do so, roll a dice and add the number of friendly Bonesplitter units wholly within 18 inches of your general to the roll. If the roll is 11, until the end of that phase, add 1 to the attack characteristics of melee weapons used by friendly Bonesplitter units wholly within 18 inches of your general. If the roll is a 12 or more, until the end of that phase, add 2 to the attack characteristics of melee weapons used by friendly Bonesplitter units wholly within 18 inches of your general. So like we said with Iron Jaws, you're probably going to struggle to have that 12 or more, right, to make the 2 extra attacks, but you might have it a bit more easier because you may have more heroes in this, because you don't have obviously the big Maw Crusher and stuff to take up a lot of points. But unfortunately, what I will say with this is it's not as good as when it's used for the Iron Jaws, because you've already got a lot of attacks here, but as we already talked, you've got a lot of attacks that aren't, more than damage 1. Whereas in Iron Jaws, you've got a lot of attacks what are generally damage 1, but you can make them damage 2. And whereas you've got more attacks in BoneSplitters, but they can't be, damage 2, whatever, the Iron Jaws have the edge because more attacks for them is they're getting more quality attacks for the extra ones they're getting, where in BoneSplitters it's just another number you're adding to your bucket you're throwing anyway. Okay, and then going on to something just to finish off their Unstoppable Savagery battle traits is going to be extra hints. And this is going to be important and something you should read, because it would save you asking your opponent this question later, halfway through a game was a bit awkward. Learn it now. If your opponent ever questions it, just point them to this bit in your battle time and it's fine. So that's going to be the extra hits. So several abilities allow Bonesplitter units to score 2 hits instead of 1 on an unmodified hit roll of a 6. If 2 or more such abilities apply at the same time, you can score 1 extra hit for each ability. For example, if 2 such abilities applied to a unit, it would score 3 hits for each unmodified 6, 1 for the hit plus 2 for the 2 abilities. If 3 such abilities applied to a unit, it would score 4 hits for each unmodified 6, and so on. So you can really see how I'm talking about the bucket load of attacks now, right? Because quite a few things in your army are making like 2 attacks anyway. So you can see how much you can capitalize on this. And also, the nice thing about this is there's several different ways to do it, as it's stated here. Again, we're not going into all the different war scrolls in this video. That's not what this video is about. But, you can look at that on the Age of Sigmar app. So then going on to the next thing, which is going to be the sub-allegiances. We'll look at them. Then we'll look at the command traits and artifacts. And then we will look at the battalions. So looking at the sub-allegiances, the first one we're going to start with is going to be Bonegrind. So I'm going to read a little bit of lore for these guys. So the Bonegrinds insist that they are the best beast hunters around, and anyone who disagrees is likely to get an arrow in the gob. The Warclan swamps the battlefield with a massive number of arrow boys and savage Orruks, relying on sheer weight of numbers to better their foes into submission. So then going on to the rules, the first ability we're going to read is Bring It On. So enemy units within 12 inches of any friendly Bonegrind units at the start of their charge phase must attempt to charge and must make a charge move if it is possible for them to do so. In addition, any enemy units within 3 inches of a friendly Bonegrind unit cannot retreat. I love this because it can force enemy units to come off objectives. It can also mean that enemies cannot escape you. Now, as I've already mentioned, you're not the toughest army in the world in terms of how hard it is to kill you, being the Bonesplitters. So it's not like being bogged down by pink horrors or something like that, but it's still very useful. And the fact that this is the ability and not the command ability, so you're not spending a resource to do it, you're just having to pick the sub-allegiance, is something I definitely like. And forcing the enemy to come to you in your terms rather than their terms is great. I think it's really good, because if they charge you, they're going to have to attack you, and then if you've got something a bit stronger behind your first rank of, let's just say, the shield, the screen, if you will, then your big tough thing can go into their thing. So yeah, I do like it for sure. I think it's good. Like I say, this game is all about movement, and this is a great way to muck up your opponent's movement. And it's weird because most of those things are like a half in their movement or making them not be able to move at all, and this one is actually making them move towards you. So it's a bit like Bloodbind. Reminds me of that from the Slaughter Priest keyword, or the Great Bray Shaman has a spell similar as well. So then going on to the command ability, we have Field Spirit. So you can use this command ability at the start of the combat phase. If you do so, pick one friendly Bonegrind unit wholly within 18 inches of a friendly Bonegrind Savage Big Boss until the end of that phase. If the unmodified hit roll for an attack made by that unit is a 6, the attack scores 2 hits on the target instead of 1. So you can really see how this is now stacking, right? And this is one of the ways you can do it. So that's nice as well. You know, the sheer weight of dice that we've seen. The only thing I will say though is it's a shame that has to be used to start the combat phase and it can't be used for your arrow boys while shooting. I know Cunning Ruck was a thing in the past that was made games feel quite abusive, wasn't fun to play against. But they say these guys bring loads of arrow boys, don't they, and loads of Savage Orc boys, but it seems like it's only really buffing the Savage Orc boys here. Like, you know, it's a little bit annoying, but it's fine. I get it. Cunning Rock was a problem. It's not a problem now. Okay, then going on to the command trait. So this is a Bonegrind general must have the command trait instead of one listed on page 67, essentially instead of one of the other ones you can pick. And what that is subtract 1 from bravery characteristics of enemy units while they are within 12 inches of this general. I honestly think this is a bit of a tax. It's not the best command trait out there by a long shot. And just subtracting 1 to the enemy's bravery, and there's no massive other ways to do it in this army, it just feels a bit like pissing in the wind. So not a massive fan of that one. But the artifact of power, which the first Bonegrind Savage Big Boss to receive an artifact must be given the Morgasts Beast Totem. So it has to be given one here rather than choosing one. So the Morgasts Beast Totem, which is once per battle in your shooting phase, the bearer can shoot as if they were armed with the Inid Bursting Bellow from the Mega Boss on Morgasts War Scroll. So that shooting attack from the Morgast, it's not great, it's not terrible, and obviously, I mean, you know, it's generally an alright shooting attack, but for like a dragon, it's not fantastic. Range of it is 8 inches, I believe, so it's just, it's nothing to write home about. But it does say that the first Bonegrind Savage Big Boss to receive an artifact of power, right? So you don't have to give one of your, basically your Savage Big Bosses, you don't have to give them the artifact. If you want to give it to someone else, that's fine. That's cool. And you can still have a big boss in your army. It just isn't the one to be given an artifact. That's how you can get around this if you would like to. So those were the Bonegrinds. I think they're good. My favourite thing was the Bring It On, which is a great ability, right? And I think that's the best thing to have. The Feel the Spirit to be able to get the extra explosion 6s on the 6s to hit is nice as well. So that's what I like. I think the command trait and the artifact is a bit of a tax, if I'm honest with you. Not the worst things you can get to have to take, but a bit of a tax nonetheless. Okay, then going on to the next one, which is going to be Icebone. So, the Icebone hail from the frozen tundras of the realm of beasts, and Icebone Orruks are as hardy and as vicious as any other winter beasts from that savage land, rampaging forth on snorting white-furred warboars. They swing weapons crafted from supernatural ice that chill their foes' blood in their veins. So they're pretty cool, and I'm already liking them just from that little snippet of their lore. So their abilities. The first one is Freezing Strike. If the unmodified wound roll for an attack made by an Icebone unit is a 6, improve the rend characteristic of that unit by 1. That's good. Like we said, you don't have much rend in this army at all really in the BoneSplitters, so any rend is good, and I won't take that back. It would have been lovely if it was a mortal wound in addition to normal damage. That would have just made it fantastic, right? And would have really picked it up for the BoneSplitters. But it's not that, but the -1 rend is still good as well, right? So then going on to the command ability, which is Freeze and Run. So you can use command ability at the end of the combat phase. If you do so, pick one friendly Icebone boar unit that is within 3 inches of an enemy unit, and wholly within 18 inches of a friendly Icebone hero. That Icebone boar boys unit can retreat in addition until your next charge phase. Subtract 2 from the charge rolls of enemy units that were within 3 inches of the Icebone Boar Boys unit before it retreated. I think this is cool, it's just because it's another movement shenanigan, right? And you're debuffing the enemy's movement, which is nice because you're -2 from the charge rolls. That means that, you know, if they want a 3-inch charge, which is, you know, the lowest they can generally get, it's now going to have to be 5 inches because of that reduced -2. It means that you can charge your Boar Boys in, if they manage to, let's say they go against something that they're not really going to take too many hits from, they can then use that charge as an extra move, because then they would then retreat and move around and get behind the enemy. Because the nice thing about this, obviously, is that you move in your movement phase, and then you can charge in your charge phase, and then you can use the combat phase, or specifically the end of the combat phase, as an other movement phase. So then you can suddenly make your boar boys actually really, really fast. So yeah, I like that. I think it's good. Okay, and then going on to the command traits. So you've got the so an Icebone Maniac weird knob. So that means that has to be that specific one. So that if you're wondering, that's basically your wizard on a boar for this army. If they are the general, they must have this command trait instead of one listed on page 67. So that is going to be Purebred Warboar. So add 2 to the general's move characteristic. In addition, add 1 to their hit and wound rolls for attacks made by the model's Warboar. So I particularly don't like this. I think it's pretty weak for a command trait. But the nice thing about it is, if you don't make him your general, and I know this is very thematic and it's all about the boars and stuff, so it feels like you should do. But if you don't make him the general and you make a other model your general, then they can take a command trait from that list, because as it states here, it has to be the Maniac Weird Knob who would have to take this. No one else is taxed into it, so that is fine. If you disagree and you think that's a good command trait, obviously let me know down below. But I just think, I always say, movement's so important, just adding 2 to it, and the attacks with the boar are meaningless, kind of. So there's nothing to really worry about. Feeling like you're missing out on that, really. And then the Artifact of Power. So the first Icebone hero to receive an Artifact of Power must be given a Cadanax Pelt. So the Cadanax Pelt, if I pronounced that right, which is added onto the Bravery characteristics of a friendly Icebone unit while they are wholly within 18 inches of the bearer. Now, there are several ways to plus your bravery in this army, but I think your bravery is pretty low. I don't know if it's really worth investing too much and giving it a +1 here and a +1 there sort of thing. You may be going like, right, screw it, I'm going to go Inspiring Presence on these units. The only thing to bear in mind, though, if you go against a Shrieker host, which is the Nighthorn Banshee Battalion, that makes you not be able to do Inspiring Presence, essentially, or you go against a Lumineth Realm Lord's army and they go, yeah, every time you want to spend a command point, it's going to cost you 2. Obviously, then it's useful to buff up your bravery, because then you can't rely on Inspiring Presence, but those are few and far in between sort of examples I'm giving you. So, the Icebone, what do I think about them as a sub-allegiance, really, overall? I think their command trait and their artifact aren't great. I'd say their artifact's better than their command trait, because you've got that wholly within 18 inches, which is a good range, so maybe it's got more use than I'm giving it credit for, particularly how I say your bravery's not fantastic. I like your ability. It's great, to just add render. It doesn't need to be in range of a hero or anything, you just get it. And then your command ability is good for your extra movement. Essentially, if you want to go boar heavy, this is going to be a good one for you, because it's going to give your boars an extra move in the combat phase. Pretty much that's all I really want to say about this one. So then going on to the next one, which is going to be the Dracfoot. So, starting off with the lore. No war clan channels the weird magic of Gorka Morka with as much potency as the Dracfoot. Crazed green zealots, they believe their holy mission is to rid the realm of geists and demons. They aim to do this by zapping the spookies with warg magic. Sorry, I was just laughing at the word spookies. Anyway, and bashing them with an enchanted weapons. Okay, I think this already, I'm finding this pretty fun. Right, okay, so going on to the abilities. The first one is Strength of Purpose. So the ethereal ability has no effect on attacks made by Dracfoot units. In addition, any abilities that negate wounds has no effect on wounds inflicted by a Dracfoot unit. I really like this. There's so many ways now to negate wounds. I know you can't stack them, but there are so many ways to do it. Firstly, just kick Nighthorn on the ground when they're down with this, essentially. And then Phoenix Guard can go to hell with their no 4-up after save and all the other after saves there are. So yeah, this is good. Strength of Purpose, I like that. I just want to say that generally the abilities you get from these 3 sub-legions have been not like game-changingly powerful, but they've been pretty strong, I think. Well, to be honest, some of them can be game-changing in the right situations. So going on to the command ability, so this is going to be Shout Down the Magic. So you can use this command ability after an enemy wizard casts a spell. If you do so, pick one friendly Dracfoot unit with 10 or more models that is wholly within 18 inches of a friendly Dracfoot Wargog Prophet or Dracfoot Wardock. Apologies if any of that was pronounced wrong. Like I say, don't care. That unit can attempt to unbind that spell. No other units can attempt to unbind that spell, just in brackets there, just so you're aware. And then you get to add one to the unbinding roll if that unit has 20 or more models. I honestly don't think this is good at all. I mean, you're probably going to be running quite a few wizards in your armies in this for your BoneSplitters, so you've got a fair amount of unbind potential. The fact that you're spending a command point to do this, I can hear you. If you've got a unit of 20 or more, it's +1, so it could be useful against those heavy magic armies. It can well be, but you're spending a command point to do it, and it has to be 21 models. I mean, it's a tool you've got on your belt to use if you need to, but I really just don't. It's one of the weakest command abilities we've seen from the book. I'll be honest with you. I mean, if I was to look at, the Bonegrind and the Icebone one is better than that. But anyway, so going on to the command trait. So, the general of the Dracfoot army does not receive a command trait. Instead, all Dracfoot wizards know the Fireball spell instead of the Arcane Bolt spell. So, the Fireball. So, Fireball has a casting value of 5. If successfully cast, pick one enemy unit within 18 inches of the caster and is visible to them. If that enemy unit has 1 model, it suffers 1 mortal wound. If it has 2 to 9 models, it suffers D3 mortal wounds. And if it has 10 or more models, it suffers D6. So obviously great if you're going against things with 10 or more models, which most armies will have. So yeah, I can see use there. And again, because it's really sort of played into this, and all your Dracfoot wizards know that spell, again, as far as I'm aware, you can only cast it once. Probably hints that you're taking a few wizards, so that just goes towards the command ability, me still not liking it. And then going on to the artifact of power, so the first Dracfoot hero, so you can't get around it by taking another type of hero or something for this one. To receive an artifact of power must be given the burning tattoos. So when you use the war paint battle trait to successfully negate a wound or mortal wound allocated to the bearer, you can inflict 1 mortal wound on one enemy unit within 1 inch of the bearer. If that was on a unit, great, but on a certain hero in this army, not fantastic. So obviously, like I said, I really like the lore for this, and I thought, the fact that they ignore ethereal and, aftersaves, I thought was great fun. And just want to say ethereal, like, as I mentioned, Ishtengard, I believe they don't have that rule because they can get pluses to their saves, so you can't get around it there as far as I'm aware. But, yeah, unfortunately, I don't think this is the best one, unfortunately. I think it's cool. To be honest, I like all of these. Like I said to you at the start of the video, I was excited to talk about BoneSplitters as I like just the idea of them a lot. But my favourite one out of the 3 is probably going to have to be the Bonegrind, and that's just because you can make enemy units charge you. You can make them charge in your own terms, everything else. Really, when they don't want to, and you've also got things like the command ability to make those extra exploding 6s good. You have got the 2 things being the command trait and the artifact that, like I said, are a bit of attacks, but the artifact you can get around. So then after that I say the Icebone and then the Dracfoot. But obviously you may disagree with me, and if you do so, please let me know in the comments, because it'll be great just to hear your thought process behind it, because like I said, if you play the army, you've got much more experience than I do, and this is just looking at it from an outsider's point of view. So now we're going to move on to your options of things like your command traits, your artifacts, your spell laws, stuff like that. So starting off the command traits, the first one we're going to look at is the Heralds of the Great Green God. So Wargog, Prophet, and Savage big boxes only, so the only ones who can take this. And the first one's going to be Killer Instinct. So it's the unmodified wound roll for an attack made with a melee weapon by this general as a 6. That attack inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target in addition to any normal damage. I don't think this is great. I mean, sure, your Savage Big Boss, if he does alright, can do some damage in combat, but not fantastically, so no, I don't like that. And then you've got Warmonger. So, if the general is part of your army and is on the battlefield, at the start of your hero phase, roll a dice. On a 4+, you receive 1 extra command point. That actually works really, really well with your Wargog Prophet, as well as he's got essentially the same ability on his War Scroll And if you obviously take more than one of those, you can really generate quite a few command points here. You can see how you can start relying on those command points to do everything you want to do in the army. So I like that one. And then you've got number 3, Great Hunter. So if this general is part of your army, when you use the Tireless Tracker's battle trait, you can move eligible 8 units instead of 5. So that is, we go back to the Tireless Tracker, it won't be on the screen, but essentially it just let you do that pre-game move. And that could be for half the Bonesplitter units in your Bonesplitters army, rounding up. And it can be up to 5, so it can be up to 8 here now, but bear in mind that's only really going to be useful if you want to get the full weight. You're going to need to have, what, like 15 units, I think, because you're rounding up when you halve it. So you've got that, and then the other thing is that it's still going to be useful if you've got, you can make it 6 units or something you move if it's eligible. So I think that could be pretty useful. And then going on to number 4 is going to be Power of the Beast. So add 2 to the general's move characteristic. It's alright, it's not the best. And then Voice of the Gods for number 5, which is add 2 to the bravery characteristics of friendly Bonesplitter units while they're wholly within 18 inches of this general. And that can stack with the Icebone as we looked at it. If you go for a different general rather than your Icebone Maniac Weird Knob, then you can actually have your other hero as the general with this command trait, and then you have your hero who's an artifact holder, let's just say, takes the one from the Icebones in that sub-legion. So if you're part of the Icebones, then you can have +3 bravery. And then a lot of your units can give you +1 because of their banner. So you can really start stacking up to like +4 here if you really want to. So it can really help because now you can be bravery sort of 9, sort of that area at most pretty much. Which is useful and means that you don't have to play the Inspiring Presence game, but you can really make yourself have so many command points that... I don't know. I think you'd have to play it out, to be fair. I'm not going to say one is better than the other. I think I personally use the Inspiring Presence all the time, but you can't always guarantee that you will. But, if, for example, this guy gets sniped out, then you've lost that +2, haven't you? So I think the Inspiring Presence is more reliable. Okay, number 6, you've got Monster Killer. So, in the combat phase, after this general has fought for the first time in that phase, this general can fight for a second time if they are within 3 inches of an enemy monsters. Alright, that can be useful in some situations. Like I said, the only guy who can really swing some damage here is going to be a Savage Big Boss. You could argue some of the other models can do a bit of damage with heroes, but realistically they can't. And the Savage Big Boss isn't fantastic at doing it, so I'm just not liking that. If you watched some of my videos before, you'll see if your army isn't about having like very killy heroes, and then the command traits and the artifacts are all about trying to make your unkilly heroes maybe subpar at killy, so a bit better than they were, I'm still not a fan. I want things that support the whole army. So as we've read here, the one that gives you +2 bravery, and then the one that gives you the extra command point are my favourite. And then also you've got the Great Hunters, which I think is good as well. So those are my favourite. The other ones I'm not bothered with. Then moving on to Shamanistic quirks. God, this is really testing my dyslexia. Right, the Bonesplitter wizards only can use these. So the first one is going to be Dead Cunning, which is at the start of the first battle round, you receive a D3 additional command points, which is good. Just to let you know, this one and the next two are the same for the wizard command traits for the Iron Jaws. So, won't talk loads in depth because we didn't cover that in the Iron Jaws video, but the extra D3 is great, especially in this army where you've got so many ways to get command points. It's just another way to do it, right? So, yep, I like that. Then the Master of the Weird, so add 1 to cast an Unbinding rolls for this general. I like that as well. As in this army, I feel like it's not as dependent as the Iron Jaws for command points. So, yeah, I think that could have more play. And then you've got the Fulfilled by the Spirit. So this general knows 1 extra spell from the Law of the Savage Beast, which we'll see in a moment. In addition, they can attempt to cast 1 extra spell in your hero phase, which I actually think is really good. If you're already going for things like you're taking a lot of Wargog profits and you're going for like the Warmonger ability for your command trait to get that extra 1, obviously, if you go a sub-allegiance, it's a bit harder to do that. But if you're already doing that sort of thing anyway, then I think you're already generating more than enough command points. So I would probably go Fueled by the Spirits. But if you're used to me and just like, want as many command points as you can, and if you can generate more, fantastic, I would go Dead Cunning. Master of the Weird, obviously it's going to be useful if there's a certain spell you want to get off with a high casting. So then going on to the next thing to look at, which is actually going to be now the artifacts of power. So this one is going to be for your Bone Splitter heroes, and it's going to be Boss Bones and other Grubbins. So the first one you're going to get is Doc Juice. So once per battle in your hero phase, you can heal D6 wounds allocated to the bearer, which is good. The problem is, because your saves aren't really good, if the enemy just wants to wipe out a hero, they're probably just going to kill it. So where I would say that is a particular favourite of mine, that sort of artifact, I don't know how much use it's going to have here. And then you've got the Savage Trophy, so add one to the Bravery characteristic of friendly Bone Splitter units while they're wholly within 18 inches. So you can see how you can really buff this up. You wouldn't be able to take this in Icebone as well unless you had a battalion to get you that extra artifact. But if you did, you could get +4 here, and then a lot of the units, like I say, get an extra +1, so you give them +5, and then they give you Bravery 10 or something. So you can see how this really stacks. Obviously, for every 10 models they have in a unit, when it comes to the Battleshot phase and they take a Battleshot test, they +1 for every 10. So you can really see how it stacks up if you want to go that route. Okay, the number 3 is Lucky Bone. So once per phase, you can either reroll 1 hit roll or 1 wound roll for an attack made by the bearer, or you can reroll 1 save roll for an attack that targets the bearer. I quite like this. I just don't think it's particularly useful in this army because you don't have those, you don't have any Archaons in this army, you don't have a Mega Boss and Maw Crusher in this army, you don't have, I don't know, a Spirit of Death, you don't have anything like that, a Terrorgeist, just to give examples of, like, these big heroes that can do a lot of damage. So I don't think it's going to be worth it. But I do like the name of the Lucky Bone, and I really, really like the description of it, because number 3, Lucky Bone, some bones are just lucky. That's great. It should be like an advert, it's mass advertising. I love that, and that's one of the things I love about the Orruk Warclans. Just like some of them are just like, what does this one do? +1 damage, and like the description of it, what is it? It's just extra sharp. Like, it's just simplicity at its best, right? And that's why I love the Orcs. So then going on to number 4, we've got Glowing Tattoos. So when you use the Warpaint battle trait to negate a wound or mortal wound for that model, it negates the wound or mortal wound on a 4 instead of a 6, which is really useful. It goes from making your units that are very squishy, very easily killed, to now being quite survivable. That's a Phoenix Guard extra save they've got on the end of it to negate wounds and mortal wounds. A lot of the times when you see things like this that increase a 6 up, after damage save, it goes down to a 5, right? So like, it's a little bit better, but not really worth you taking at that point. It's not really worth you choosing an artifact. But if you really want to keep your general alive, I think this could be a useful one. And then going on to the Great Drake Teeth. So pick one of the bearer's melee weapons. If the unmodified wound roll for an attack made with that weapon is a 6, double the damage inflicted by that attack. Which then makes specifically, your Savage Big Boss could do a bit of damage now with that. He could chuck out quite a bit of damage now. He's got 6 attacks, I believe. He could be pretty good. But it's 6 is to wound. It's not reliable. But if you want like a little cool beat stick running around, you can do it. And I know I just said don't do that because this army doesn't really aim towards it. It doesn't. You're probably doing, a disadvantage to yourself. But for a bit of fun, you could give it a go. I don't know. So then going on to number 6, we have Weeperwood Big Shiv. So pick one of the bearers and melee weapons, add 1 to the attack characteristic of this weapon. Already bored reading it, not useful in this army. So my favourites out of this are probably going to be the Savage Trophy, try and help out with your bravery, the Glowing Tattoos, and then it's going to be the Doc Juice as well. Yeah, they're my favourites. Maybe the Glowing Tattoos is the best, I think, but the Savage Trophy I could see being useful. And the Doc Juice is obviously fantastic for healing, but I think that you will do yourself better at saving against damage by going with the Glowing Tattoos rather than the healing after, because you have to be alive at the end of the day to try and do the healing. So going on to the next thing we'll look at, which is going to be the Reservoirs of War Energy. I think that's how it's pronounced. So this is for Bonesplitterz wizards only. So the first one is going to be Big Wargog Mask. So in your hero phase, you can select one enemy unit within 12 inches of the bearer that is visible to them, and roll up to 3 dice. If you do so, each 2+ inflicts D3 mortal wounds on that unit, and each roll of 1 inflicts D3 mortal wounds on the bearer. I like this. It's pretty wacky, it's pretty risky, but you can do 3D 3 mortal wounds onto your enemy, which I really like. It says in your hero phase you can just select it, so it's not once per battle from anywhere I can see, so it's just something you can continuously do. And yeah, it's risky, but let's say you give this to also the guy who's got the glowing tattoos. He's got a 4-up save against mortal wounds anyway, right? So it's worth the risk. So yeah, I do like that. And then you've got Mork's Bony Bits. Can't even imagine what that's going to be. So you can add 1 to the casting rolls for the bearer if there are 2 or more enemy monsters within 24 inches of the caster. Add 2 to the casting rolls instead of 1. So that can be pretty useful to make sure you get your magic off. And then we've got the Mystic War Paint. So at the start of your hero phase, roll on the Law of the Savage Beast table, which we'll get to in a moment. The bearer can attempt to cast that spell in that hero phase, in addition to any other spells that they can normally attempt to cast. If the bearer already knows that spell, they can attempt to cast it 1 extra time in that hero phase, in addition to any other spells that they can normally attempt to cast. Just want to say, I like how they added on that little bit at the end, just to make it not redundant in case that comes up. But I like that. I don't think it's as good. I think it's because if you really want to get a certain spell off, the chances of getting that 1 spell you want to try and cast twice, you need to guess, it's 1 in 6 chance you being able to choose essentially what spell that is. And looking at the other 2, I think for the Mork's Bony Bits, it's reasonable for 2 enemy monsters to be within 24 inches of you to get the +2, and if you're not, you're still getting +1. And obviously if you go for the command trait that gives you +1, you can really start helping yourself there. In all honesty though, my favourite one is Big Wargog Mask. I know, probably not the best one, I get it, I understand, but I just think that's a load of fun, right? And I really like it. But my safe bet would be Mork's Bony Bits. The Mystic War Paint could be really useful, but it might not be as useful. Depends how it goes. So then, now, talking about the spells, funny enough, we're going to have a look at them. So we're going to have a look at the BoneSplitters spell lore. So you can choose or roll for 1 spell from the following table for each Bonesplitter wizard in a BoneSplitters army. So your standard way about getting spells in your army. So the Law of the Savage Beasts it is. So the first one is going to be Squiggly Curse. So Squiggly Curse casts some value of 6. You successfully cast, pick or 1 enemy hero within 3 inches of the caster and roll a dice. That hero suffers D3 mortal wounds. If that hero is slain by those mortal wounds, you can add 1 to the casting rolls to the caster for the rest of the battle. If the casting roll was a double, the hero suffers D6 mortal wounds instead of D3 mortal wounds. Right, because the range on it is so small, the D3 is not going to be enough really, but if you get the double D6, probably going to be able to do a fair bit of damage and could potentially kill that enemy hero to help you casting. But it's not a reliable thing, so it's not my favourite one if I'm completely honest with you. Right, going on to the next one is going to be a Breath of Gorkamorka. So it has casting value of 6, is successfully cast, pick 1 friendly Bonesplitters unit wholly within 24 inches of the caster that is visible to them. Until your next hero phase, double that unit's move characteristic. In addition, until your next hero phase, that unit can fly. If the casting roll was a double, triple the unit's movement characteristic instead of doubling it. Right, so remember before at the start of this video, I talked about how I had some Savage Boar Boys charge me from God knows how far, like the other side of the table, and flying pigs. This is how he did it, and it was absolutely fantastic. This is my favourite spell. We'll get to if it's actually the best spell realistically in a moment, but so far, definitely my favourite, and is my favourite close start, because he just made pigs fly, right, and it was great. Then number 3, we've got Brutal Beasts. So it has a casting value of 6, is successfully cast, pick 1 friendly Bonesplitters unit wholly within 20 inches of the caster that is visible to them. Until your next hero phase, add 1 to run and charge rolls for that unit, and add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made by that unit. If the casting roll was a double, you can select 2 different friendly Bonesplitter units within 24 inches of the caster to be affected by this spell instead of 1. So that is actually huge, because actually no, reading it, so it says within down below, but it's wholly within at the top, and just so you know, there has been an FAQ and it is just wholly within for both, just so it clears that up. Yeah, that's good, that's pretty useful. It means you're getting +3 to charge at that point for a lot of your units, which is nice. You're then getting plus to hit, so that's going to only help you even more. It won't make that those exploding 6s happen on 5s now, because that is unmodified 6s, so just bear that in mind. But no, Brutal Beast Spirits is very good. especially if there's a chance for you to put it on 2 units. And it's not like some of these spells where, like, if you cast it on an 11 or a 10 up or something, you get the extra bonus. A double, I think, is, you know, there's more chance of it, but I haven't done any mass hammer behind that. It just seems like there's more. So then going on to number 4, we've got Bone Crusher. So Bone Crusher has a casting value of 6. Is successfully cast, pick one enemy unit within 24 inches of the caster that is visible to them. If the target is within 6 inches of the caster, it suffers D6 mortal wounds. If the target is more than 6 inches and within 12 inches of the caster, it suffers D3 mortal wounds. And if the target is more than 12 inches away from the caster, it suffers 1 mortal wound. I don't really like this. You have to be quite close to the enemy, and you probably will be like that at your BoneSplitters anyway, but yeah, it's not my favourite. Obviously, you know, you can do D6 mortal wounds, which is good, but you do have to get pretty close. Depends. I suppose, like, if you've got experience, let me know, but I think that's a bit too close for my liking. Unless you go, you know, this is with the guy with the glowing tattoo, so he's pretty survivable anyway. And then going number 5, we've got Cunning Beast. So as a casting value of 6, it's successfully cast, pick 1 for any BoneSplitters unit wholly within 24 inches of the caster that is visible to them. Until your next hero phase, add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target that unit. So that is good there. When you also have units with shields as well, you get +1 save well. So you can go make your like 6 up saves into like 4 up saves as an example. So that is good because your army does kind of need it because, like I say, they will just melt really quickly. And then you go on to Orruk Warclans. So has a casting value of 7. It successfully cast, pick 1 enemy unit within 8 inches of the caster that is visible to them. Inflict D3 mortal wounds on that unit. In addition, that unit fights at the end of the next combat phase. So it's your way to activate first. You know, it's your way to play in these activation wars, as it's called. So it is going to be very useful. So I'd give one of your wizards this spell. But my favourite spell out of all this is Breath of Gorkamorka, to make you move ridiculously far and to be able to fly. Movement's how you win this game, and that is such a good spell. Like I've already mentioned, had it used against me, and it won my opponent the game. And there wasn't really anything I could do to just counter how ridiculously fast that was. So it makes a huge difference to the game, and that is why I like it. And it was used against me, and like I said, it was a good old laugh seeing these pigs fly. So I really do like that for mainly sentimental reasons. So then going on to the last one we're going to look at, and that's going to be the Battalions. So the first one is going to be Brutal Rock. So 1 Savage Big Boss and 2 to 5 Savage Orruk or Savage Boar Boy units in any combination. And the ability you get is Savage Swiftness. So units from this battalion that are wholly within 12 inches of the same battalion's big boss at the start of the charge phase can run and still charge later in the same phase. That is really good. I really like it. Like I said, you're getting plus to your charge anyway, and it's making you go that even faster. And like I say, if you get the other buffs off and there's armor that you can do, you can have some really, really fast units. So I do like that. And the Brutal Rock is actually going to cost you 140 points. So not ridiculously expensive. You know, I'm sure. I think it'd be worth trying out on that one. And then the next one is going to be Cop Rock. So which is 2 to 5 War Dogs, 2 to 5 Savage Orruk Moorboy units. So if you're wondering what the Moorboys are, essentially they are like the crazy. They're even more savage than the normal Savage Orcs. So they tend to be better at offense, but worse at defense compared to Savage Orcs. And then we have got for the abilities the Savage Weird Power. So at the start of your hero phase, you can pick 1 War Dog from this battalion that is wholly within 8 inches of 2 or more units from the same battalion that each have 10 or more models. That War Dog can attempt to cast the Fist of Gork spell from the Wargold Prophet War Scroll in that phase, in addition to any other spells it can cast. Now that spell is okay, depending on what you're fighting, but I really feel like you'll be taking a lot of Wargold Prophets anyway, so I don't really think that this is a particularly good one. But if you are interested, the Cop Rock is actually going to cost you 140 points. So I do feel like the last one was better. And then you've got the Cunning Rock, which has got a very famous name, but it's not nearly as powerful as it was. So you've got 1 Savage Big Boss and 2 to 5 Savage Orruk or Savage Orruk Arrow Boy units in any combination. And the ability is dead sneaky. So in your hero phase, pick 1 unit from this battalion that is wholly within 12 inches of the Savage Big Boss from the same battalion. That unit can make a normal move or shoot. Units from this battalion cannot have more than 20 models. So for me, Cunning Rock was a problem and they had to sort it out somehow, but they've basically just gone, they've just like really sort of put it down from what it was if you really want to go heavy on the Arrow Boys. But for movement, it's an extra movement you can get in your army. Like I said, your army can be pretty fast anyway, so there is that. But, you know, for the shooting capability, it's not as good as it was, but it's not god-awful as some other battalions out there. But the Cunning Rock is going to cost you 140 points as well, which maybe it's useful. Maybe it's, you know, still worth it, but I'm not too sure. And then you've got for your next one is the Snagga Rock, I think it's pronounced. So this Snagga Rock is going to cost you 120 points, so it is cheaper. And you've got 1 Maniac Weird Knob, so that's basically the Weird Knob on the ball. And then you've got 2 to 5 Savage Boar Boy Maniac units, which, like I said, are the more combat offensive ones. And this is, you can reroll charge rolls for units from this battalion while they are wholly within 12 inches of the Maniac Weird Knob from the same battalion. Could be useful. It's going to save you spending those command points, so yeah, could be good. And it's only 120 points, so depending on how you want to run it. The only thing is, it's like, oh, you want to take this with, you know, Icebone, because then you want the Maniac Weird Knob as your general, but you don't actually, because the command trait's not very good. So yeah, it just feels a bit. It could be useful, but, you know, don't look at Icebone as the best way to take it, maybe. But you don't have to make the Maniac Weird Knob your general, so maybe I'm just overthinking it. So then going on to the Teeth Rock, which is going to cost you 140 points, so a bit more expensive than the last one, but the same points as the other ones we've seen. And the organisation for this is 1 Savage Big Boss and 2 to 5 Savage Big Stabber units. And the ability is We're the Best. So add 1 to the attack characteristics on many weapons used by units from this battalion while they are wholly within 12 inches of the Savage Big Boss from the same battalion. So that could be particularly good. You know, they can make they can do so much damage. If you're going against a heavy monster army as an example, this is definitely worth it. Those big stabbers can chuck out a lot of damage. Like I said, I'm not going into the individual war scrolls. This video I've already read enough rules, but, you know, you have a look yourself and you'll see what I mean. So yeah, I think that's quite cool. And, you know, why not like the ability? We're the best. You know, it's hard to argue with that one, I think. And with that, chaps, that's actually going to come to the end of the video. So, to summarise our question, why play Orruk Warclan Bonesplitters? And that is because if you want an army that's all about a laugh, you're going to basically laugh to yourself when you actually read the rules, like I did. But it's an army that is quite heavy focused on magic, but it's all about dishing out a load of attacks. And if you thought to yourself, you know what, I like Destruction, I think it's cool, but it's just not crazy and, you know, savage enough for me, then these Bonesplitters are the ones for you. So what I want to say, this video has been particularly long, and it's longer than most of the wide plays I did. It's not as long as the Iron Jaws one, but that's because, you know, I haven't had another person on, so it's not a discussion, it's just me telling you my thoughts. But the reason why this is generally longer is, like I said, I want to get the Bonesplitters and the Iron Jaw ones done, because they are actually allegiances, not sub-allegiances of the Orruk Warclan battle tome, so it's important that. And I thought it'd be nice if we can just talk about the sub-allegiance for them while we're doing this, because the other thing with doing this Orruk Warclan content, and I've done a video on Gloomspite Gits lately, and I've done a video on Ogres lately, there's not loads of content out there for Destruction. Now, there are some people doing some fantastic stuff for them, but there's not loads of content out. So, to be honest, I've really been enjoying making some content for armies that don't get too much, just giving them a bit of love. And that's why I'm glad to do the Bonesplitters, because I don't really hear too many people talking about them. Like, if you want to be as most competitive as you can, I think you go Big War and Iron Jaws, and then Bonesplitters are the least competitive out of this book, and that's why they're not really talked about too much, sort of like I said at the start of the video. But I really feel like they still have some play, and rather than people just, you know, put them to the side, they can really do some stuff. So I do think it is important to talk about them, and I've very much enjoyed talking about them, hopefully just sharing some inspirations and thoughts to you guys, and hopefully you found this video enjoyable and helpful, and it's made your decision on if you should play Bonesplitters or not. So what I will say, guys, if you did enjoy this video, please remember to smash that like button, that subscribe button, make sure you hit that bell notification if you haven't already. It's like I said, those are 3 ways to, number 1, massively support this channel if you enjoy the videos. It keeps us going, and it's free for you guys to do as well. Also, by pressing the like button, it lets me know that you enjoy this content, and maybe you would like to see other videos like this. Because I make videos what you guys like. You know, if you don't really like videos, I tend to not make them. So, you know, it's help me help you sort of situation on that one. And what I do want to say as well is if you would like to support the channel a step further, I have got a Patreon. So if you would like to go to the description of this video, at the top you'll find a link to my Patreon. And even if you could just give $1 a month, guys, it would massively help the channel. And like I said, that is the lifeblood of how this channel keeps going, and I can justify putting this time into it. So if you want to check out, that's fine. But if you can't, just remember to like the video and subscribe and hit that bell notification if you haven't already. But what I do want to do right now is say a shout out to my patrons, as they do always deserve it. So this is going to be my Morgasts, which are Sandback, Johnathan H, Filq and Bleed Red. My Vampires, which is Mir, Martin S, Rouse321 and David A. My Necromancers, of course, which is Jacq.l, RadiationRiley, AW77, Dice Sagas, WolfNick, Michal W, Quad, Cranky Wombat and Chris C. So again, Necromancers, thank you so much for helping the channel. My Vampires, you do a really nice job there, the amount you give. And then my Morgasts, I don't know what to say. Your generosity is beyond words to me. So I really do appreciate that. And like I say, if you'd like to become one, click the link in the description down below. Massively appreciate it. But what I would also like to say to you guys is, as I've mentioned throughout the video, if you've got your own thoughts on the BoneSplitters, or there's anything that you disagree with I said and you would like to tell me why, put it down below. We'll all be interested to hear. And if you've got any questions as well, I'll be happy to help you best I can. So with that, guys, I want to say thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you're keeping well and safe out there. Remember to stay safe, most importantly. Stay hygienic, wear a mask and wash your hands for God's sake, so we can actually start playing games again soon instead of just talking about them. And most importantly, beyond all of that, is remember that Nagash is all, and all is one in Nagash.